Good morning.
Cooking.
New wig, new day, new chapter. Oh, we have a few people who have joined us. Willow is here to welcome you all to chapter 5. She may not make it. We will try. Bryce. Hold on, we might have to have a baby taken out. Hold on. Anyways, how's everybody's weekend? She's really into this book. Willow really wants to read chapter 5. It's become her Bible in this quarantine that we all live in.
Jolene, Jolene.
See, she wants us to just get right into it.
No.
Chapter 5. We are on chapter 5. There was Willow. Oh, I think your Aunt Valerie's in there. I see that.
Paper bodies.
Hi, everybody.
Oh, Babes craves coffee, not paper bodies. Sorry.
This is Bryce, for all of those who don't know.
Bryce Tony.
This is Willow, the screamer,
Willow Zephyr Tony.
who's so into this idea of this Dolly Parton book that she just can't put it down. She just wants to be so close to it. She wants
And
to
here
sleep
comes
with
Jennifer.
it. And of course, here is another viewer, Jennifer the cat. For those of you that are just joining us, we are reading
Bye, Valerie.
the 90's book called Dolly, My Life and Other Unfinished Business, her biography that came out in 94 according to the internal biography paper jackets. Right here. We have been reading every other day, same time. We're now in chapter 5. We've learned things such as where the song Coat of Many Colors came from. Oh yes, there is also a new wig. Sorry, someone was just trying to call and I had to silence it. So, so we learned about Christmas traditions with Dolly Parton and her family being poor in the Smoky Mountains. What else? She's still living as a child. She was very rambunctious as a kid. So we're just going to delve right into chapter 5. Oh, there's been an update. I've been trying to put the last 4 chapters onto YouTube because there has been some requests. It will go live. We had some technical issues. I had trouble uploading them over the weekend, but I think I figured out the mistake. So those will go up this week so people can get caught up. Again, you don't have to watch me. You can just put me down, set me down on the counter, walk away, and just listen to this. Tend to those babies, whatever you have, or whatever you need to do. Drink your coffee, drink your cocktail. This could be vodka or tequila. You just don't, no judgments. The best thing we heard was, pretend it's like the airport right now that we're in. There's drinking all the time at an airport. 5 a.m., 5 p.m., it don't matter. We're in quarantine. Drink, listen to this amazing book, and here we go. We're going to go to chapter 5. Okay. And I'll try to interact. If there's any questions, I'll try my best to interact. It's not always the easiest. So, here we go. Enough rambling. Chapter 5 of Dolly, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. All my life, at least from the time I have been able to grasp more of life than my own toes in my crib, I have been driven by 3 things. 3 mysteries I wanted to know more about. 3 passions. They are God, music, and sex. This is going to be a very good chapter, I think. I would like to say that I have listed them in the order of their importance to me, but their pecking order is subject to change without warning. In my heart of hearts, I always know that God comes first. But in my body of bodies, some other urges can be absolutely irresistible. For the moment, since I'm writing and am therefore primarily a spiritual being, I will try to deal with them in their rightful order. Like everything else in my life, I found God in my own unique way. Lord knows there was those who tried to find him for me. From the time I was born, I was carried, led, pushed, or dragged into church every time the doors opened. Speaking of doors, Bryce is just entering us again. I felt a need for God and always wanted to have a relationship with him, but I was the ultimate nightmare for a fundamentalist Christian out to save souls. I was a kid with her own opinions. My grandpa Owens was a preacher and my mama was a devoutly religious woman. I could see that the way they worshiped God worked for them. They were good good people and lived their lives the way I thought a person should. So I had no problem with wanting to be like them in that way. I guess what I resisted was the way God was presented. I can remember seeing the pictures in the Sunday school pamphlets that showed him as a big old scary thing. He might be frightening. He might be a frightening old cougar with long hair and a beard, blowing the winds out of his cheeks. Or the vengeful God with a fiery look in his eyes, shooting lightning bolts from his fingers to strike us down, those sinners. If you are a kid who is naturally afraid of old men and lightning, is this somebody you'd really want to know? Now, of course, I can see that there was no accident, for fear was indeed the tool often used by the well-meaning soul savers to bring those less opinionated to redemption. I'm wondering if we're striking any nerves with people these days as we're reading this chapter. Okay. It was effective, even on me. A good preacher could work up a sweat delivering the standard fire and brimstone sermon, with his voice reverberating through the rafters of those old country churches. It would send chills up your spine. Are you prepared to meet God? You could be killed on the way home today. Are you ready to be judged? I guess I had damned well because I guess I had damned well better be ready to be judged because it was obvious I was going to be every day of my life. To me, it seemed like a lot of people took the Bible too literally. But at the same time, they were selective in which parts they clung to with such conviction. Again, it's like we're living the times of Dolly all over again. It seemed to be like the part about judge not lest ye be judged got kind of swept under the rug. I also felt that they had misrepresented the words God-fearing. Maybe this was because the Bible had been translated from Hebrew. Maybe it was because many of the people passing on the word of God couldn't read or write. They were limited by what they were told was truth by other illiterate people who had been told it by others, and so on. I can remember one very fat woman in church. Dolly just tells it like it is. No judgments, no body shaming. I'm sure Dolly has learned her lesson since this book was written. Of course, I can remember one very fat woman in the church. She had lost some weight and people couldn't help but comment on it. Yeah, I've been fasting, she said. Just like Jesus, I fasted 40 days. Of course, I eat at night. I suppose she'd get that familiar fasting headaches. Take 2 ham biscuits and go to bed. Her fasting for 40 days is an example of how literally some people took the Bible. I remember one particular case of this that had me confounded for the longest time. There is a Bible verse that reads, "Whosoever shall call his brother a fool is in danger of hellfire." This was taken very literally. That meant that I could call my sisters a fool with complete immunity. But if I should even accidentally call one of my brothers a fool, I would burn in hell. This was quite a scary proposition because I had a lot of brothers and any one of them at any given moment could act like a fool. Now, I never called anybody a fool that didn't deserve it. By the same token, if someone did deserve to be called a fool, I felt it was my duty to do so. This kept me constantly walking on the brink of fiery pits of hell. There also was a great catch-all commandment that could make just about anything a sin. Honor thy father and thy mother. Anything you did or said that went against what your mother or father wanted you to do or say could be construed as dishonoring them and therefore a sin. This was the one situation when I used to turn the literal translation of the Bible around to work for me. It says honor. I would say not obey. This, of course, did not keep me from getting my butt beat, but it did allow me to sniff back my tears with a healthy sense of righteousness. Looking back, I truly believed that what I have done with my life has brought honor to my father and mother. For those of us that are joining, we are reading Chapter 5 of Dolly, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. Here we go, continuing on. Looking back, I truly believe that what I have done with my life was brought honor to my father and mother, and I feel I have done right by both of them, and God in that respect. I now also believe that God-fearing actually means God-respecting, but at the time the fear was real. I can remember sitting in church and listening to what a worthless sinner I was and feeling so ashamed without giving much thought to what I had to be so ashamed of. What has a 6-year-old kid done that justifies being burned in hellfire? Anytime I asked questions like that, I was always told that I was too young to understand. It seemed to me that should work both ways. I should also be too young to be punished for something I didn't understand. Then I was told that just the fact that I was questioning things was a sin in itself. Blasphemy. This is a very deep chapter. Whew, I hope it lightens up soon. There's a good way to explain something to an inquisitive kid. Give them a word they can't possibly understand. One that sounds like blasting something, or worse yet, like something you might accidentally do with some body part without knowing it. In searching my soul for the terrible sins I had committed, it was the area of my body parts that seemed to be the most likely key to my deserving to be burned in hell. I think this is where the juicy part comes in. Oh, we're right there. Okay, I won't read ahead. It says, well, here comes sex ahead of schedule. Remember in the beginning, she laid out the lines of this chapter, and sex was number 3. So, here we go. I guess as honorable as my intentions might be, it is going to be impossible to write about my 3 passions without mixing them together in the same way they overlap and intertwine within me. Nature, which is God, is going to have its way. As a kid, you might have told a lie or two, or maybe taken some things that wasn't yours. But these don't seem to be capital offenses, so it must be sex that condemns you to hell. Now that you've had sex or anything close to it, but somehow just being aware that it exists feels like a grieving sin in itself. Again, we're reading the Dolly Parton, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. For those that just joined, I don't want you to panic and freak out like, oh my God, he's talking about sex as a sin and where do I go? Ah! He's wearing a wig! Ah! Okay. Now that you've had sex or anything close to it, but somehow just being aware that it exists feels like a grievous sin in itself. The fact that you might have actually thought about doing something, or touched your brother during a community bath, or yourself in your bed at night, must be your great sin. The sex drive being as difficult to resist as it is, and having been so branded as evil, can give a thinking child a sense of helplessness. I'm being driven steadily toward hell by a force beyond my control, so you try not to even think about it. That, of course, is like the old problem of trying to count to 10 without thinking of a banana. Of course, under those circumstances, you can think of nothing but bananas. Every boy in those hills had a banana. I was always aware of boys at church. The custom for many of the men was to take the women and children to church and then stand outside under the trees and drink while the weaker ones got the religion they needed. After all, they were men and needed nothing but their own wits and muscles. Of course, it was also customary for each man to get converted from time to time and go through an intense but brief period of crying and begging the Lord, and most likely his wife, for forgiveness. I guess it wasn't unmasculine for the men to get their religion in those short or intense doses. I suppose also that most of the women had relationships with God that were more constant and committed, much like their relationships with their spouses. Among the most prominent under the tree drinkers were a pair of characters named Red and Clarence. Now that is a southern name. They were 2 of the biggest drinkers, or the biggest drinking carousers around. But when the Spirit hit them, they could get very religious. Once Red had decided he had received the gift of tongues, a common practice in our Pentecostal church. He went to church a few times and would, on impulse, stand up and go into seemingly meaningless strings of syllables to which the believers would respond with, "Bless Lord Jesus, bless him." The story is that one day, Red and Clarence were downtown in a truck belonging to one of them, and Red looked out the window and was reading a sign somewhat haltingly Economy Auto Supply. Economy Auto Supply. Red sputtered, to which Clarence, assuming his friend had gone into tongues, quickly came back with, "Bless him, Lord!" I guess if that's what speaking in tongues is, we're all pretty coherent. You know, we all stutter, so maybe we all have the gift. You don't even have to go to church for it. That story circulated through the ranks of the church membership and was the source of great laughter for a time around the Parton household. It became something of a running joke that would crop up whenever anybody said anything that could be mistaken for tongues. Sunday morning, getting ready for church, a brother would say, "Come tie my bow tie," and some smart aleck sibling would shout, "Bless him, Lord!" And the rest of us would join in, all pretending to be caught up in the spirit. Young boys were dragged to church the same way I was, but since they were destined to become men, they were given more leeway. I suppose when they started growing pubic hair, they were allowed to wander out of church before the service was over to take their place outside, as if training to be men. Much of their training apparently involved staring back into the church at us girls. I'm going to take a sip of water. Or maybe it's booze. It was the custom after church. I'm just kidding. It's totally water. It was the custom after church for the boys and girls to do some limited socializing, flirting, and so on. While the women gossiped and the men smoked and spit, this flirtation, however, was limited by the distance the boy could get the girl to walk into the woods. The couple's ability to escape the gaze of the adults and the girl's own boundaries. I feel like they're going to be breaking some social distancing rules very shortly in this chapter. So there I sat, trying to be holy, praying for forgiveness for sins. I couldn't put my finger on it, repenting for things I had put my finger on, and all the while being aware of the boys looking at me, the woods behind the church, and the possible combination of all of these things. The devil and I certainly had one thing in common. We were both horny. We all kind of knew that about her, right? I often went down the aisle when the choir sang and the preacher made his final frightening plea. I would get down there and pray, but I never felt like I had really found God and didn't want to publicly make a commitment until I had. I used to watch the others in the church, especially some of the women, who would get worked up into an almost trance-like state and raise their hands and shout at various times during the sermon. They seemed genuinely in tune with God in their way, and I wanted to know what it was they felt. There was one man who struck me as being very different. At the time, we were going to an old church with a high ceiling and exposed rafters. Sound would resonate from the old seasoned wood in a haunting way. The man's name was Kurt Dockery. At times during a service, he would stand up and sing. He would just feel led to sing and get up, no matter what was going on at the moment. Everyone knew to expect it, and they would stop whatever they were doing and listen, because the man's voice was strong and rich and sincere. He would get a certain look in his eyes, maybe like that, or like this. Or, I'm just trying to react to some of this in the book, and I think those are maybe what his eyes were. Okay. He would get a certain look in his eyes, and then rise and let out with, "I'm a poor wayfaring stranger." There was a real reverence in his voice. I could tell he was singing directly to God. Of all the people I knew, he seemed to have really made contact. I truly wanted to receive salvation, and I prayed long and hard for it. For some reason, though, I didn't want the boys looking at me while I prayed. In fact, I didn't want anybody looking at me. It was too personal a thing for me to do in public. That's why I prayed on my own in private places. I finally found one place that became very special to me. It was an old abandoned church. It had been the chapel in Catton's Chapel, the little community we lived in. Most of its windows were broken, and its old floorboards were buckled and dusty. But to me, it seemed like God still lived there. Ironically, it became a place for all types of sin and vice. Boys would meet there to shoot craps or drink beer and moonshine. Couples would use it at night for sexual encounters. Boys and men fought there. There had been more than one stabbing. And yet for me, God still lived there. I would often play in the space under the floor of the old chapel. I can still smell that soft, cool dirt. There were the telltale cones built by the doodlebugs. I would lean close and say to them, Doodlebug, your house is on fire. The sound of my voice would cause the sound dirt around the hole to vibrate, making the doodlebug think he had been trapped, or he had trapped an ant. He would betray himself with a flick of sand, and I would move in for the capture. It was while playing under the old porch that I sometimes found the gold foil packaging that had contained condoms. I had never heard them called anything but rubbers. I used to put the two sides back together and pretend they were gold coins. I knew exactly what they were and would never dare to take these coins home. It was because I knew what they were that I was fascinated by them. I knew what had come in this packaging, what it had been placed around, and what it had ultimately been placed into. That, to me, held more mystery and attraction than real gold would have. Again, we are reading Chapter 5 of Dolly Parton, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. For those of us that are just joining, we're not just sex ed or anything. We're talking Dolly sex ed. Inside the old church, the dirty drawings on the walls were more testimonies to youthful sexuality. I spent a lot of time looking at them, studying the way the sexual organs had been drawn, and at times trying to add to them. Also, inside the church was an old piano with a cracked sounding board and rusting strings that had been left behind when the congregation moved on. So, here in one place was God, music, and sex. My fascination was complete. I picked up the flat pieces of ivory that had been the tops of the piano keys and kept them as a treasure. I once took some strings from the soprano section and fixed them to an old mandolin I had found in our barn. It was more like a dulcimer, really. And when I strummed it, it sent up a droning sound that I could sing to. I wrote a lot of songs with that old mandolin. And so I would sing hymns to God for a while, and look at dirty pictures for a while, and pray for a while. And one day, as I prayed in earnest, I broke through some sort of spirit wall and found God. Where's Willow?
What's she look like?
Oh.
How tall is she?
Is she napping?
No, she's still up.
Oh, she's quiet. Sorry. Sidebar. Child in the other room. Had to check on her. Don't worry, Bryce is with her too. Okay, back to the book. Okay, and so I would sing hymns to God for a while and look at dirty pictures for a while and pray for a while. And one day, as I prayed in earnest, I broke through some sort of spirit wall and found God. Away from the stares of the boys and the mothers and the preachers, I had met him not as chastening, bombastic bully, but as a friend. I could talk on a one-to-one basis. He is our Father, after all, and that's the kind of Heavenly Father that made sense to me. Here in this place of seemingly confusing images, I had found real truth. I had come to know... we're coloring. We're coloring. I had found real truth. I had come to know that it was all right for me to be sexual beings. Oh, we're coloring on the book now. I knew it was one of the things God meant for me to be. I also knew that my dreams of making music, of traveling outside of Smokies and pursuing a greater purpose, were not only silly childhood ideas, but grand, real schemes ordained and co-created by my newfound Heavenly Father. Oh no, she dropped the crown. She got it again. There it is. I was validated. I was sanctified. I was truly reborn. I was happy. I thanked God long and loud for having shown himself to me. I sang with a strength and conviction that only God and possibly Kurt Dockery could have understood. The joy of the truth I found there is with me to this day. I had found God. I had found Dolly Parton, and I loved them both. On my way home that day, I was on a cloud. Oh, wait, we don't color on the table. Don't color on the table. Nope, don't color on the table. On my way home that day, I was on a cloud, or at least I felt like it. My happy feet danced on and kicked up the dust of the old road. On the way, singing and shouting, a man came along in an old A-model truck. "Where are you going so happy on this fine day?" he asked. I gave him no thought to my answer. It came from me as if it were the obvious truth that anybody could easily see. "I'm going to paradise," I said. The man chuckled and drove on. How could he have known that he had just talked to a 12-year-old girl and God all in one breath? I will never forget the feel of my feet on that happy road. The dust seemed beautiful to me. Poverty and doubt did not exist. I knew God. I knew where paradise was. It was ahead of me. I couldn't wait to tell Mama that I knew I was saved. I begged her to let me be baptized right away. Some of the women in church were against it. They didn't think a 12-year-old girl who had found God somewhere other than at the front of the church service knew what she was about. Mama instinctively knew how genuine my conviction was, and she allowed me to be baptized by Brother L.D. Smith in the Little Pigeon River. I remember getting up very early that day and putting on that white dress Mama had prepared for me. I was filled with a sense of awe and reverence as I waded out into the flow of the river. I knew the symbolism of being lowered into the water to signify the death of my old sinful self, then raised up to be born into a new high righteousness. That symbolism was lost on some of the boys who gathered on the riverbank to witness this sacred rite. When I was 12, those body parts that were destined to become my calling card in life, and the reference point of many a joke by late-night talk show hosts, were already well in evidence. This is a good way to, I think we're ending the chapter, but it's a good way to end it. Okay. I'm just going to start the chapter over, not chapter, but that paragraph. I don't want to sound perverted. When I was 12, because these are words coming from Dolly Parton. So, when I was 12, those body parts that were destined to become my calling card in life and the reference point for many a jokes by late-night talk show hosts were already well in evidence. My white cotton dress became somewhat transparent in the rushing water, and the boys on the bank were moved to shout, "Hallelujah!" This seemed inappropriate to some of the attending church biddies who had seen through this sudden groundswell of religion among the boys as surely as the boys had seen through my dress. I thought it was altogether in keeping with what I had learned in the old chapel and my relationship with my friendly God. He wouldn't have given them to me if he hadn't wanted people to notice them. And that is the end of chapter 5. Willow made sure to color while we were reading. This isn't a sweet drawing. It was dedicated to Dolly Parton in chapter 5 of My Life and Other Unfinished Business. So if you just joined us and stuck through chapter 5, we come and do this every other day. So join us on, today's Monday, I think, which means Wednesday. Come back Wednesday at 10 a.m. Hawaii time, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. All the rest of your time zones you have to figure out on your own. I can't do that kind of math right now. That's become my little tagline. And we will continue on with chapter 6. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all for who has inspired us to continue to keep doing this. And we hope that everyone's having a good one. What was that? Oh, Bryce and Willow want to come say bye before you leave. So those of you who are still here, wait. But yeah, we appreciate you guys joining us. Here she comes, and here he comes.
Thanks for joining us at Curious...
Story time.
Story time.
See ya.